The rhythmic thud of the bass rattled the floorboards of the top floor unit and dissolved into the salty October air of Rehoboth Beach. Inside, the atmosphere hummed with the specific energy of unearned luxury. Champagne flutes chimed against one another in a rolling cascade of toasts. Laughter bounced off the newly installed Calicotta marble countertops. At the center of the kitchen island stood my younger sister, Kelsey. She wore a silver silk dress that caught the ambient lighting, gesturing with a practiced flick of her wrist toward the custom brass hardware she had spent weeks agonizing over. She was holding court surrounded by 30 guests who murmured their approval. I stood in the entryway watching the performance. I did not take off my coat. I wore the same tailored charcoal blazer and structured flats I had put on at 6 o'clock in the morning for a compliance review in Wilmington. Beside me stood Marcus, a representative from a corporate property acquisition firm holding a thick bound leather folio. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the draft from the hallway. Someone by the digital thermostat noticed me first, and their smile faltered. The unease rippled outward, contagious and swift, until the guest manning the Bluetooth speaker muted the track. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant crash of the Atlantic surf outside. Kelsey turned her eyes, darted from my sensible shoes to Marcus and his severe suit. Her rehearsed hostess smile dissolved into a tight line of confusion. "Harper," she said, the syllables sharp. "You aren't on the list. We are doing a private thing tonight." I walked forward. My footsteps sounded hollow against the engineered hardwood. I didn't look at the guests. I didn't look at the expensive catering spread. I kept my gaze locked on the kitchen island, navigating the sea of trendy outfits until I stood directly across from her. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a set of heavy brass keys, and let them fall. The metal struck the imported stone with a sharp, resonant clatter. "The locks change on Tuesday," I said. My voice held the steady, flat cadence I used when presenting audit discrepancies to a board of directors. Kelsey stared at the keys. "What is wrong with you, Dad?" Our father, Tom, stepped out from the hallway, a highball glass tight in his grip. His face flushed a deep crimson, the veins in his neck straining against his collar. I turned to Marcus. He opened the folio, extracted a single sheet of watermarked paper, and set it next to the champagne bucket. "This property is now owned by Vanguard Holding Group," I said, looking back at my sister. "The sale cleared an hour ago. You have 72 hours to vacate." The room exhaled a collective stunned breath. Tom opened his mouth to yell, but the words died in his throat as I held his gaze, letting him see the exact boundaries of his own trap. Before I explain how I legally evicted my own sister and forced my parents to face federal fraud charges, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the Sophia Vengeance channel. Drop your age in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to know who is standing with me today. My name is Harper Ellis. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of the worst financial betrayal a family could commit, and the exact ledger I built to make them pay for it. Let me take you back 3 weeks earlier. The air in the Human Resources office in Wilmington smelled like stale coffee and whiteboard cleaner. I sat across from David, our chief security officer, and a woman from Human Resources whose name I had already forgotten. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a relentless sterile hum. As a senior data compliance auditor, my entire career rests on a foundation of impeccable security clearance. Financial leverage makes people susceptible to corporate bribery. If you owe a steep debt, you are a risk. David slid a manila folder across the fake wood grain of the conference table. He did not meet my eyes. "Harper, your routine background check flagged a critical anomaly this morning," he said. "Your credit score dropped from 810 to 540 overnight." My chest tightened, but my hands remained flat on the table. Data does not lie. Only people lie. I opened the folder. Printed on the top sheet was a notification from a national lender, a mortgage origination $670,000. The status read 90 days delinquent. The property address listed was a luxury unit in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. I rent a quiet townhouse. I drive a 10-year-old car. I had never seen this address in my life. "We have to place you on immediate administrative leave," David said, his tone shifting into corporate protocol. "Until this debt is cleared or verified as an error, your badge access is suspended." They took my keycard. They escorted me out of the building I had helped secure for 6 years. I walked to my car in the midday sun, the asphalt radiating heat through the thin soles of my flats. I did not cry. Panic is a useless metric. Process is everything. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled up my credit monitoring app. The screen loaded, pulling raw data from the servers. There it was, the staggering 6-figure anchor dragging my identity to the bottom of the ocean. I tapped on the loan details. The origination date matched the exact month Kelsey had miraculously announced she bought her dream beach condo. The condo my parents praised her for acquiring. The condo they said proved she was finally settling down. My fingers hovered over the steering wheel. The leather felt cold despite the heat of the day. A boutique clerk does not qualify for a beachfront mortgage. I did not call my sister. I did not call the police. I opened my laptop in the passenger seat, tethered it to my phone, and began to trace the digital footprint of a stolen life. Every system error leaves a trace. I just had to find the source code of my family's betrayal. The heat inside my 10-year-old sedan was suffocating, but I did not turn the key in the ignition. I sat in the visitor parking lot of the corporate office I had just been exiled from and stared at the glowing screen of my laptop. The dashboard clock read 2:14 in the afternoon. The leather steering wheel radiated a harsh midday heat against my knuckles. My security badge rested dead and deactivated in the cup holder. I picked up my phone and dialed the toll-free number listed on the credit alert. A digitized voice guided me through an endless maze of automated prompts before finally transferring me to the fraud department of a national mortgage lender. A woman named Janet answered. Her voice was flat-tired and deeply familiar to anyone who works in compliance. I identified myself. I recited my social security number. I gave her my date of birth. Then came the security questions. What was the make and model of your first vehicle? What is your mother's maiden name? I answered them mechanically. Thank you, Harper, Janet said, the typing of her keyboard echoing through the earpiece. I see the account here. A 30-year fixed-rate mortgage originated 8 months ago. The property is located in Sussex County, Delaware. The current balance is $660,000. The account is currently 90 days past due, triggering the default status. I closed my eyes. The afternoon sun baked the roof of the car. I need the origination packet, I told her. The initial application, the closing disclosure, and the digital audit trail for the electronic signatures. I am a data compliance auditor, and I am reporting this account as fraudulent. I need the raw data sent to my email immediately. Janet paused. Usually victims of identity theft cry, they yell, they ask how this could happen. They do not request digital audit trails. She read me a brief disclaimer about fraud investigations and confirmed she was sending an encrypted PDF to my inbox. I hung up the phone. I started the engine and pulled out of the corporate lot, merging onto Interstate 95. I drove south toward my townhouse. The radio remained off. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the rush of the wind. My mind began to catalog the last 8 months. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner where my parents had proudly announced Kelsey's new milestone. She had stood in the dining room pouring wine and talking about the incredible deal she found on a luxury oceanfront condo. Kelsey is 28. She works 20 hours a week at a coastal boutique selling overpriced soy candles and linen cover-ups. She spends her weekends curating her social media presence. When I asked my father how she managed the down payment, he had waved his hand dismissively. He gave me that familiar look of gentle disappointment he reserved exclusively for me. He told me Kelsey had a gift for manifesting good things and that I could learn a lot from her positive energy. My parents had always operated on the philosophy that Kelsey required protection and I required nothing. I was the responsible one, the human safety net. I paid my own tuition. I built my own credit. I lived within the rigid margins of reality so my sister could float above it. I pulled into the driveway of my townhouse. The neighborhood was quiet. I unlocked the front door and walked into my living room. The space was neat structured and entirely under my control. I dropped my keys on the console table and walked straight to my home office. I did not stop to drink a glass of water. I did not change out of my corporate blazer. I powered on my dual monitors. The screens flickered to life, casting a sharp white glow across the surface of my desk. I opened my encrypted email and downloaded the file Janet had sent. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I titled the document, The Rehoboth Ledger. In my profession, process replaces panic. When the numbers fail to match the narrative, you do not argue with the narrative. You audit the numbers. I opened the lender document. The PDF was 84 pages long. I scrolled through the initial application. There was my name. There was my social security number. There was my employer listed perfectly. But the contact email was a generic Gmail account I had never seen before. The phone number listed was a burner. Then I found the income verification section. My stomach twisted into a cold, tight knot. Attached to the file were copies of my W-2 tax forms from 3 years ago. A stranger on the dark web does not have my 3-year-old tax documents. A stranger does not know the exact gross income I reported before my recent promotion. Only one person had those documents, my father. I had used his home printer during a weekend visit to run copies for a lease application. I had trusted the man who raised me to shred the digital cash. My hands hovered over the keyboard. A tremor started in my left wrist. I pressed my palms flat against the cool laminate of the desk to steady them. I needed definitive proof. Assumptions have no place in a ledger. I scrolled to the very end of the PDF to the electronic signature certificate of completion. When you sign a legal document online, the software does not just capture an image of your signature. It captures a deep digital footprint. It logs the exact time the document was opened, the time it was signed, and most importantly, the IP address of the device used to sign it. I found the final page. The signature stamp read Harper Ellis. The date was a Friday in late February. The timestamp was 8:14 in the evening. I checked my personal calendar on my phone. On that specific Friday in February, I was sitting in a corporate boardroom in Wilmington, conducting a data security seminar. I looked back at the screen. I highlighted the IP address listed under the signature block. It was a standard string of numbers. I copied the sequence. I opened a network diagnostic tool I use for tracking remote server breaches. I pasted the IP address into the search bar and initiated a trace route. The command line interface blinked green against the black background. The data packets bounced across regional servers, tracing the origin of the internet connection. The screen populated with geolocation data. The internet service provider was Verizon. The location narrowed from the state level down to the county. The longitude and latitude coordinates appeared on the screen. I copied them and pasted them into a mapping application. The satellite image loaded. The red pin dropped directly onto the roof of a single-story ranch house in Sussex County, a house with a detached garage and an oak tree in the front yard, a house I had grown up in. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The silence of my townhouse felt heavy pressing against my eardrums. The air shifted from sterile to suffocating. My parents had not just co-signed a loan for their favorite child. They had harvested my financial identity. They had impersonated me. They had forged my signature to secure a $670,000 asset they had no intention of paying for. They had sacrificed my career, my reputation, and my future to buy my sister a kitchen with imported marble. I looked at the ledger on my right monitor. The arrears stood at $14,550. The default was active. My security clearance was gone. My job was hanging by a thread. I picked up my cell phone from the desk. The battery read 40%. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the listing for my father. I did not rehearse what I was going to say. I did not practice a tone. I simply pressed the green call icon and put the phone on speaker, resting it next to the keyboard. The line rang once, twice, then the call connected.
"Hey, kiddo,"
my father said, his voice warm and easy, carrying the casual tone of a man who believed his secrets were buried deep.
"We were just talking about you."
I looked at the red pin on the satellite map. The ledger was open. The audit had officially begun. The voice filtering through the phone speaker carried a sickening casualness. Tom Ellis sounded like a man expecting a routine conversation about weekend plans or shifting weather patterns. He did not sound like a man who had just committed wire fraud. I kept my gaze fixed on the glowing trace route coordinates populating my monitor. I did not return the greeting. Instead, I recited the sequence of numbers displaying on the screen. I read the IP address aloud. I stated the latitude and longitude parameters. I listed the internet service provider. I kept my delivery clinical, devoid of any emotional inflection. The line went quiet. The forced warmth evaporated, leaving a brittle, tense silence. I asked him why my electronic signature was executed from his personal router on a Friday night when I was 100 miles away. I asked him how a boutique retail clerk earning a fraction of my salary suddenly qualified for a beachfront estate. A heavy sigh transmitted through the receiver. It was the sound of a parent inconvenienced by a stubborn child.
"Harper, please listen to me,"
he said. His tone shifted down an octave, adopting a placating rhythm.
"We were going to tell you. Kelsey found this incredible opportunity,
and the seller was demanding a rapid closing. Your sister works so hard, but the banks do not understand her compensation structure. They needed a co-signer. You never answer your phone during business hours, so we pushed the paperwork through to secure the rate. It was a simple family favor." A family favor. The phrase hung in the sterile air of my home office. I typed the phrase into my spreadsheet under a new column labeled Rationalizations. My mother Brenda picked up the kitchen extension. Her voice chimed in, carrying that familiar razor-thin edge of maternal disappointment. "Do not overreact, Harper," she said. The word overreact was her favorite weapon. It was designed to shrink my valid panic into an irrational character flaw. "We are handling the payments. It is just paper. Why are you digging into this and creating unnecessary drama?" I looked at the PDF file containing my 3-year-old tax returns. I noted the forged email address and the burner phone number. "You submitted fraudulent federal tax documents," I replied, maintaining a flat, unyielding cadence. "You impersonated a corporate auditor to a national lender. That is not drama. That is a federal felony," Tom scoffed. A sharp, dismissive burst of air echoed through the speaker. "You are being hysterical. The account is current. Nobody is getting hurt here. Kelsey has her sanctuary, and you are sitting there running computer searches like some kind of paranoid detective." I pulled the keyboard closer. "If the account is current, give me the login credentials for the lender portal right now." They hesitated. The hesitation lasted 4 seconds.
In a financial audit, 4 seconds of silence is a full confession.
Brenda started to speak, but I cut her off. I told them if I did not have the username and password within 10 seconds, I would hang up and call the authorities to report a stolen identity. Tom rattled off an email address and a password. I typed them into the lender website. The authentication wheel spun for a moment before the dashboard loaded. The interface was designed in clean modern aesthetics, but the crucial numbers were rendered in stark, alarming red font. The principal balance stood at $660,000. Beneath that, a bold banner warned of imminent default action. The arrears totaled $14,550. They had not made a single payment since the initial closing date. I read the numbers aloud. $14,000 past due, 90 days delinquent. Neither of them spoke. The ambient noise of their kitchen filled the void. A refrigerator hummed. A dog barked 2 streets over.
"We had some unexpected medical expenses,"
Brenda finally said, her voice losing its self-righteous edge. "And Kelsey needed to furnish the place. You cannot put cheap furniture in a premium property. We are waiting on a bonus check. We will catch up next month." They had stolen my future to buy a sofa. I felt a profound, hollow detachment settling into my chest. The people on the other end of the line were strangers. They were parasitic entities draining my resources to sustain a delusion.
"My corporate security clearance was revoked today,"
I stated.
"Human resources placed me on administrative leave because my credit score imploded. I am locked out of my building. I cannot do my job." "Well, that seems like a severe overreaction from your employer,"
Tom replied, immediately shifting the blame to the corporation.
"You have vacation days saved up. Enjoy the time off.
We will clear the balance before it affects anything permanent." The delusion was impenetrable. They believed their own narrative so deeply that reality could not pierce the surface. They viewed my life as a checking account equipped with infinite overdraft protection. I ended the call. I did not say goodbye. I simply severed the connection. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The silence returned, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt clarifying. If I allowed this default to proceed to foreclosure, my career was over. I would never pass another background check. I would be blacklisted from the financial sector. I would not be able to lease a new apartment or finance a vehicle. My entire existence would be defined by Kelsey and her imported marble. I opened a new tab on my browser. I needed to see the physical documents. Digital traces were enough to prove the origin, but the county recorder holds the physical deed. I navigated to the Sussex County Public Records database. The website was clunky, operating on an outdated Civic server. I entered the property address. The search results populated after a long loading screen. I paid the nominal municipal fee using my credit card and downloaded the recorded deed. The document loaded on my screen. It was standard legal boilerplate. Grantor and grantee meets and bounds. I scrolled past the property description to the signature page. There was the imitation of my handwriting. It was a sloppy attempt, mimicking the loops but missing the sharp angles I naturally use when signing official forms. My eyes drifted down to the notary acknowledgement section. A mortgage cannot be finalized without a licensed official verifying the identity of the signer. Someone had to look at a piece of identification, look at the person holding it, and apply their state-issued seal, swearing under penalty of perjury that Harper Ellis was present in the room. I zoomed in on the circular black stamp pressed onto the bottom corner of the page. The name inside the seal read, Gary Mitchell. My breath caught in my throat. My lungs stopped expanding. The blood roared in my ears, drowning out the hum of the computer tower beneath my desk. Gary Mitchell was not a random title clerk. Gary was my father's oldest friend. He had stood beside Tom at his wedding. He had been at every childhood birthday party holding a video camera. Gary Mitchell was my godfather. I looked across my office. On the bookshelf nestled between reference manuals and auditing textbooks sat a small silver frame. Inside was a photograph from my 10th birthday. I was wearing a paper crown. Gary was standing behind me, smiling, holding a cake with lit candles. He had always been the protective uncle figure, the one who brought me books when my parents only bought Kelsey toys. He had applied his official seal to a forged document knowing it would ruin me. He had weaponized his state commission to help his best friend steal my identity. The betrayal mutated. It was no longer just parental negligence or sibling entitlement. It was a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple trusted adults. I closed the PDF. I needed to know how deep the rot went. Gary could not have processed this alone. A title company had to prepare the paperwork. A closing agent had to orchestrate the transfer of funds. Someone at that agency had turned a blind eye to a fraudulent driver's license and a bogus email address. I looked at the top of the deed, prepared by Coastal Title and Escrow. The agent listed was Miranda Reed. I grabbed my keys from the console table. The digital audit was complete. It was time to conduct a physical inspection. I walked out of my townhouse and locked the door behind me. I had a 2-hour drive to Rehoboth Beach and a serious conversation to have with Miranda Reed. The asphalt of Delaware Route 1 stretched out like a gray ribbon under the relentless afternoon sun. I guided my 10-year-old sedan into the parking area of a service plaza, shifting the transmission into park. The air conditioning unit rattled as it struggled against the heat radiating through the windshield. My laptop sat open on the passenger seat, tethered to my cellular hotspot. The digital trace route leading to Uncle Gary was still burned into my mind. But I needed the raw financial data of the account itself. The credit report had shown a default, but a credit report is just a summary. I needed the ledger. I picked up my phone and dialed my parents' landline. The ringing echoed through the Bluetooth speakers of my car. Tom answered on the second ring. His breathing was heavy, indicating he was likely pacing across the hardwood floor of their living room.
"We already talked about this, Harper,"
he said, his voice tight with defensive irritation. "We used an old W-2 we had on file. The broker said it was fine. We are paying it.
There is no reason to escalate this into a crisis. If you are paying it, give me the login credentials for the lender portal right now,"
I replied. My tone was devoid of inflection. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the precise, hollow cadence of a prosecuting attorney establishing a timeline. Tom hesitated. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background. It was a daytime renovation show. The irony was suffocating.
"I do not have the password handy,"
he deflected.
"Your mother handles the online banking. We will print out the statements and bring them to you this weekend. We can have dinner and talk about this like rational adults."
"You will give me the login credentials while I'm on this phone, or I will end this call and dial the fraud division of the Sussex County Sheriff's Office." I stated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard.
"You have 10 seconds, Tom."
A sharp sigh cut through the speaker. I heard a muffled exchange of words followed by the rustling of paper. Brenda picked up the kitchen extension. She rattled off an email address and a password. Her voice trembled, but it was not the tremor of guilt. It was the vibration of a woman deeply offended by being held accountable. I typed the sequence into the lender website. The authentication wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the dashboard loaded. The user interface was designed with clean, modern lines, but the crucial data points were rendered in stark, alarming red font. The screen was a sea of financial hemorrhage. The principal balance hovered just under $670,000. Beneath that, a bold scarlet banner dominated the page. The status read, delinquent. The arrears totaled $14,550. They had not made a single payment since the closing date. They had signed the forged documents, handed Kelsey the keys, and walked away from the liability. $14,550 past due. I read the number aloud, letting the syllables land like heavy stones in the quiet cabin of my car. You are in active default. The bank is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Brenda scoffed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound she had perfected over 3 decades. Do not overreact, Harper. We had some unexpected cash flow issues. The contractor required a larger deposit for the kitchen renovations than we anticipated. Kelsey could not move in with outdated appliances. We are expecting a bonus check at the end of the quarter. We will catch up then. My hands gripped the steering wheel. The leather squeaked under the pressure. You prioritized custom appliances over a federal mortgage in my name, I said. My corporate security clearance was revoked today. Human Resources placed me on administrative leave. My career is suspended because you stole my identity to buy a house you cannot afford. Jobs come and go, Harper. Brenda countered, her tone shifting into a weaponized softness. Family is forever. Your sister needed a safe place to land. You know how fragile she gets when she feels unstable. Kelsey was not fragile. Kelsey was insulated. When she dropped out of a university program because the dorm lighting gave her migraines, Brenda had immediately leased her a luxury apartment near campus. When Kelsey quit a public relations internship because the manager expected her to arrive by 8 in the morning, Tom had bought her a car to ease her commute. They had spent 28 years paving a smooth road for my sister using my achievements as the raw material. You committed wire fraud, I said, the reality of their actions solidifying in my chest. You impersonated a corporate auditor to a national bank. You convinced Uncle Gary to notarize a forged signature. Stop using those ugly legal terms, Brenda snapped, her weaponized softness vanishing. You are so cold, Harper. You have always been cold. You look at everything through spreadsheets and risk assessments. You care more about some numbers on a screen than your own sister's happiness. We raised you to help your family, not to interrogate us like criminals. The accusation hung in the humid air of the car. Cold. It was the label they assigned to me whenever I refused to absorb their collateral damage. In their minds, my boundary was an act of aggression. My demand for basic respect was a character flaw. I stared at the red banner on the laptop screen. A profound, chilling clarity washed over me. The people on the other end of the line were not misguided parents trying to help a struggling child. They were active threats. They viewed my life as a checking account equipped with infinite overdraft protection. They would gladly watch my career burn to the ground if it kept Kelsey warm. I will not be paying your arrears, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. And I will not be answering your phone calls. Harper, do not do anything dramatic, Tom warned, his voice rising in panic. We can fix this. Just give us time. I reached forward and pressed the red icon on the touchscreen display. The call disconnected. The silence in the car was immediate and total. I did not cry. I did not scream. I closed the laptop and placed it in my bag. I shifted the car into drive and merged back onto the highway heading south. The emotional tether that had tied me to my parents for 34 years had just snapped. I was no longer a daughter seeking an explanation. I was an auditor executing a penalty. 40 minutes later, the highway narrowed into the coastal roads of Sussex County. The scent of salt water and sunscreen filtered through the air vents. I navigated the familiar tourist-heavy streets until I reached the residential development. The architecture shifted from quaint beach cottages to imposing modern structures composed of glass and steel. I parked my car across the street from the address listed on the lender dashboard. The building was pristine. The landscaping featured exotic drought-resistant plants and a paved cobblestone driveway. A commercial van belonging to a high-end custom tile company was parked out front. I rolled down my window. Through the large floor-to-ceiling windows on the ground floor, I could see movement. Contractors in white painter pants were carrying sheets of imported stone. Standing in the center of the chaos, holding a clipboard and an iced coffee, was Kelsey. She was laughing, pointing at a wall, adjusting the blueprint of her stolen sanctuary. I stepped out of the car. The sea breeze caught my hair. It was time to find out exactly how much my sister knew about the crimes funding her renovations. The coastal sunlight reflected off the pristine glass windows of the condominium building, blinding me for a brief second before I stepped onto the cobblestone driveway. The ocean breeze carried the sharp scent of salt water, mixing awkwardly with the heavy industrial odor of wet mortar and fresh paint. I walked toward the open front door of the ground floor unit. A heavy brass doorstop held the entryway open, allowing a steady stream of workers to pass through. I stepped over a canvas drop cloth, listening to the whir of a power drill echoing from the master bedroom. The interior of the property was a monument to unearned privilege. The walls were painted a crisp gallery white. The flooring was imported wide plank oak. In the center of the sprawling kitchen stood my sister. She wore a breezy linen outfit, the standard uniform of someone who never had to clock into a corporate office or report to a human resources department. Kelsey was holding a ceramic tile sample against the newly installed cabinetry. A contractor in dusty work pants stood beside her, holding a clipboard and waiting for her approval. I paused in the foyer. My shadow fell across a stack of architectural blueprints spread out on a temporary folding table. I watched her for a long moment. I had driven 2 hours, fueled by the certainty that my sister was the architect of my financial ruin. I assumed she had leveraged our parents' affection to secure my digital identity. I assumed she knew the cost of her luxury. I stepped into the kitchen. The sound of my sensible corporate flats against the hardwood drew her attention. Kelsey turned her head. Her bright, practiced smile was ready for a compliment from a neighbor or a delivery driver. When her eyes registered my tailored blazer and rigid posture, the smile faltered. "Harper," she said, her tone holding a mixture of mild surprise and distinct annoyance. "You did not tell anyone you were coming down. We are doing the backsplash installation today, and the tile setter is charging by the hour." I did not offer a greeting. I did not acknowledge the contractor. I kept my gaze locked on her face. "How did you structure the financing?" I asked. My voice cut through the ambient noise of the construction site carrying the flat, unyielding cadence of a forensic audit. "Who processed the application for this property?" Kelsey blinked, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. The question did not seem to compute. She tilted her head, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the sliding glass doors. "Financing for what?" she asked. "For the $670,000 asset you are currently tearing apart." I replied, stepping closer. "Who signed the legal paperwork?" "Mom and Dad handled all the boring legal details," she said, waving her hand in the air as if swatting away a trivial insect. "They used the family trust money. It was a direct cash transfer. Why are you acting so intense right now?" The phrase family trust money hung in the dusty air. A sharp, bitter sound clawed at the back of my throat. I swallowed it down. There was no family trust. Our paternal grandfather had been a public school teacher. Our maternal grandmother worked an assembly line in a textile mill. The concept of a hidden generational wealth fund was a complete fabrication. It was a financial fairy tale constructed by our parents to protect their favorite child from the harsh mathematics of adult responsibility. "There is no trust," I stated, maintaining unbroken eye contact. They took out a 30-year mortgage. They put the massive debt in my name using my social security number. The account is currently 90 days past due, and the national lender is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. I watched her face, waiting for the guilt to surface. I expected a tearful confession. I anticipated a defensive justification or a sudden panic regarding the potential loss of her new home. Instead, I saw only a profound, vacant detachment. Her posture remained relaxed. Her breathing was even and slow. "That does not make any sense, Harper," she said, her voice dropping into a patronizing register. "Dad told me the deed is clear. He promised me this property was a secure investment for my future. You are just being paranoid because you hate taking risks. You always try to ruin my milestones with your anxiety." I studied her micro-expressions. As a compliance auditor, I read people the same way I read spreadsheets. I look for anomalies. I look for deviations from an established baseline. A liar exhibits physical tension when confronted with undeniable evidence. A fraudster deflects or attempts to manipulate the narrative. Kelsey exhibited nothing but the arrogant annoyance of a preferred child interrupted during her interior design process. She was not the criminal mastermind. She was too insulated, too ignorant of basic financial mechanics to orchestrate a digital identity theft. She did not know what an origination fee was, let alone how to bypass a corporate identity verification system. My parents had built this elaborate lie to sustain her delusions of grandeur. They had used my pristine credit score as the foundational brick to build a castle for a daughter who believed money materialized from thin air. Kelsey was merely a useful idiot spending resources she could not comprehend.
"Excuse me,"
the contractor interrupted, tapping his pen against his clipboard.
"We need a decision on the grout color before the mixture dries."
Kelsey turned her attention away from me instantly. The theft of my career, the destruction of my credit, the impending tax ruin, all of it was categorized as negative energy, disrupting her design choices. "Look, Harper, I have a million decisions to make today," she said, speaking over her shoulder. "If you are going to bring this toxic energy into my sanctuary, you need to leave. Call Mom if you are confused about the banking paperwork. I am sure there is a perfectly logical explanation for whatever glitch you found." She dismissed me. I stood in the kitchen of a house I technically owned, watching the woman who was bankrupting me choose between charcoal and slate gray grout. I turned to walk toward the exit. My gaze swept across the entryway foyer. Against the wall sat a modern console table topped with a piece of polished driftwood. A haphazard stack of mail rested near the edge. Most of the envelopes were junk. There were glossy catalogs for high-end furniture retailers and solicitations for local landscaping services. Near the bottom of the pile, a thick manila envelope protruded. The paper was heavy stock. The return address printed in the top left corner caught my eye: Coastal Title and Escrow. The documents inside that specific envelope represented the physical bridge between my stolen digital identity and the official deed recorded with the county municipality. My parents had handled the digital signatures from their suburban living room, but a physical closing package had to be mailed to the property address for the new homeowner's records. Kelsey had likely tossed it onto the table without opening it, assuming it was just more boring legal details she did not need to understand. Kelsey was busy arguing with the contractor about the spacing of the tiles. The ambient noise of the power tools provided a steady cover. I adjusted my leather tote bag. My movements were smooth, deliberate, and entirely devoid of hesitation. I stepped toward the console table. I slid the thick manila envelope from the bottom of the stack and dropped it into the open compartment of my bag. I did not look back. I walked out the front door, stepping over the brass doorstop and onto the cobblestone driveway. The ocean breeze hit my face again, feeling colder this time. I had arrived in Rehoboth expecting to confront a malicious sibling. I found an oblivious beneficiary standing inside a sinking ship. The real enemies were back in their living room believing they had successfully contained the fallout. I reached my car. I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The heat inside the cabin had intensified, but I barely noticed the temperature. I pulled the stolen manila envelope from my bag and rested it on the steering wheel. The flap was sealed with thick industrial adhesive. I ran my thumb under the edge and tore it open. The paper ripped with a sharp, satisfying sound. Inside lay the closing disclosure, the settlement statement, and the physical copy of the recorded deed. I bypassed the standard disclosures and flipped directly to the final pages. The digital trace had given me the IP address, but I needed to see the physical evidence. I needed to see the wet ink. I needed to see the precise details of the betrayal recorded on official county paper. I turned to the signature acknowledgement page. I needed to look at the notary stamp. I needed to see the name of the state licensed official who had sworn under penalty of perjury that I was sitting in a room signing my life away. The thick paper of the closing disclosure rested against the steering wheel of my sedan. The air conditioning continued its futile battle against the coastal heat, but the internal temperature of the cabin suddenly felt freezing. My fingers traced the edge of the document. The settlement statement itemized my engineered ruin line by line. Loan origination fees, title insurance premiums, state transfer taxes, all of it tallied and assigned to my digital identity. I flipped past the numerical breakdowns and the standard regulatory warnings. I bypassed the truth and lending disclosures. I needed the final page. I needed the signature acknowledgement block. The paper rustled in the quiet car. I stared at the bottom line. There was the ink, the blue ballpoint pen strokes attempting to replicate my name. As an auditor, I spent countless hours reviewing verified signatures. A natural signature flows with muscle memory, carrying speed and distinct pressure points. The signature on this deed was hesitant. The loops of the letters were bloated. The sharp angle I always use on the letter H was replaced by a soft, clumsy curve. It was the handwriting of someone drawing a name rather than writing it. It was an offensive imitation. But the forged ink was not the element that stopped the breath in my lungs. My eyes drifted down a few inches to the designated legal verification section. A mortgage cannot be filed with a county clerk simply because someone scribbled a name on a dotted line. The American real estate system relies on a crucial layer of localized security. A state-commissioned official must serve as an impartial witness. That official is legally required to examine a valid government identification, look at the face of the person sitting across the desk, and verify their identity. They must administer an oath. Then they apply their state-issued seal swearing under penalty of perjury that the transaction is legitimate. I read the standardized text printed on the form. State of Delaware County of Sussex. On this day personally appeared before me the above-named Harper Ellis to me, known to be the person described in and who executed the foregoing instrument. Below that text pressed firmly into the fiber of the paper was a circular black ink stamp. My vision blurred. A harsh ringing sound erupted in my ears, drowning out the hum of the engine. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping the visual data was a processing error. I opened them again. The letters inside the black circle remained unchanged. Gary Mitchell, Notary, Public State of Delaware. My stomach plummeted. A wave of profound nausea washed over me, forcing me to lean forward against the steering wheel. I placed my hand over my mouth, taking short, shallow breaths. Gary Mitchell was not a random title clerk processing files in a rush. Gary was my father's oldest friend. They had played football together in high school. Gary had stood at the altar as my father's best man. More importantly, Gary was my godfather. I reached into my center console with trembling fingers and picked up my cell phone. I tapped the screen to wake it. The lock screen illuminated, casting a soft glow in the shadowed car. The background image was a scanned photograph from my 10th birthday party. In the foreground, I was sitting at a picnic table wearing a ridiculous paper crown missing one of my front teeth. Standing directly behind me with his hands resting protectively on my shoulders was Gary. He was smiling wide, looking down at me with genuine pride. My father had been away on a corporate business trip that weekend. Tom had missed the party. Gary had shown up early to assemble my new bicycle and light the candles on the cake. Gary had been the safe adult. When my parents were consumed with Kelsey and her endless series of manufactured crises, Gary was the one who remembered my debate tournaments. Gary was the one who mailed me a fountain pen when I passed my certified public accountant exam. He was the protector figure in a family structure that otherwise viewed me as an invisible utility. I looked from the smiling man on the lock screen to the cold black ink of the notary seal. The cognitive dissonance was agonizing. Parents steal from their responsible children because they view offspring as extensions of their own assets. Tom and Brenda rationalized their wire fraud through a twisted lens of parental entitlement. But a godfather does not possess that biological delusion. A family friend must make an active, conscious choice to destroy a life. Gary had sat in a room with my father. He had watched Tom or Brenda forge my name. He had retrieved his official ledger and his state commission stamp. He had pressed that stamp onto the paper knowing the exact trajectory of the financial missile he was launching at my future. He had risked his own freedom and his professional license to facilitate my ruin. Did Tom pay him a portion of the loan proceeds? Did Gary owe my father a gambling debt? Or was the loyalty between two middle-aged men simply stronger than a lifetime of supposed affection for a goddaughter? The betrayal shifted, shedding its purely financial skin and mutating into something deeply, irreparably personal. The foundation of my reality cracked. Every memory featuring Gary soured, instantly tainted by the black ink on the page. He had smiled in my face while holding the knife aimed at my back. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. I stared out the windshield at the pristine landscaping of Kelsey's stolen sanctuary. The nausea began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculated stillness. Heartbreak is an inefficient metric. It provides no solutions and balances no accounts. The tears dried in my eyes before they could fall. The ledger was expanding, and I needed to catalog every liable party. Gary had verified the forged signature, but a notary public does not disperse $670,000. A notary does not clear a title or wire funds to a seller. Gary was just a tool in a larger mechanism. He was the key, but someone else had built the door. I looked back at the closing disclosure. I traced my finger to the top of the document where the corporate letterhead was printed, Coastal Title and Escrow. Below the agency name was the assigned settlement agent, Miranda Reed. Miranda Reed had orchestrated the closing. She was the professional responsible for ensuring compliance with federal lending laws. She was the one who accepted Gary's fraudulent verification without demanding a secondary identity check. In the highly regulated world of real estate transactions, anomalies do not just slip through the cracks. They are ignored. They are bypassed by professionals who are either lazy, incompetent, or complicit. I pulled out my laptop and opened a search engine. I typed in the name of the title agency. The business listing populated on the screen. Coastal Title and Escrow was located in a commercial office park just 15 miles north in the town of Lewis. I checked the operating hours. It was Thursday afternoon. They closed at 5. I had exactly 90 minutes to cross the county lines. I carefully folded the forged documents and placed them back into the thick manila envelope. I tucked the envelope securely into my leather tote bag. The evidence was secured. The digital footprint had led me to the physical forgery, and the forgery had provided the names of the co-conspirators. I shifted the sedan into drive. The tires crunched against the cobblestone as I pulled away from my sister's luxury unit. I did not look back at the expansive windows or the imported marble. My focus narrowed to the road ahead. I was driving toward Lewis, Delaware. I was going to walk into Coastal Title and Escrow, and I was going to find Miranda Reed. I needed to know exactly how much pressure it took for a licensed closing agent to ignore federal law, and whether that pressure was something I could use to dismantle the entire conspiracy. The drive to Lewis took less than 30 minutes, but the landscape shifted from the chaotic energy of beachfront construction to the muted, sterile environment of commercial real estate. Coastal Title and Escrow occupied a beige stucco building tucked between a dental practice and a regional insurance branch. The parking lot was half empty. I pulled my sedan into a visitor spot and turned off the engine. The ticking of the cooling radiator filled the silence. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back into a severe knot. My charcoal blazer remained unwrinkled. I did not look like a victim. I looked like an auditor arriving to dismantle a corrupt ledger. I grabbed my leather tote bag and stepped out into the afternoon heat. The glass double doors of the agency opened with a soft hiss of pneumatic hinges. The reception area smelled of vanilla air freshener and ozone from a large laser printer. A young woman sat behind a curved mahogany desk, typing rhythmically on a mechanical keyboard. I approached the desk and stated my name. I requested a meeting with Miranda Reed. The receptionist did not ask for my appointment details. She simply pointed down a carpeted hallway lined with frosted glass office doors. "Third door on the left," she said without looking up from her monitor. I walked down the corridor. The ambient noise consisted of muffled phone conversations and the hum of central air conditioning. I reached the third door. A brushed steel plaque read, "Miranda Reed, Senior Settlement Agent." The door was open a fraction of an inch. I pushed it wide and stepped inside. Miranda sat behind a cluttered desk, sorting through a stack of legal-sized folders. She wore a pale blue silk blouse and thin wire-framed glasses. She looked to be in her late 30s, projecting an aura of exhausted corporate competence. "Can I help you?" she asked, glancing up from her paperwork. Her tone was polite but hurried, the standard cadence of a woman drowning in administrative tasks. "My name is Harper Ellis," I said. I remained standing near the doorway. The name landed like a physical blow. Miranda stopped moving. The legal folder in her hand slipped, sliding across the polished wood of her desk and scattering loose papers onto the floor. She did not reach down to pick them up. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a pale ashen gray. Her eyes darted from my face to the closed blinds of her office window and back again. "You are Tom's daughter," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am the legal owner of the property you closed on Friday, February 24th. I corrected. I stepped deeper into the office and kicked the heavy wooden door shut behind me. The latch clicked into place, sealing us inside. Miranda swallowed hard, the tendons in her neck strained. "You need to leave," she said, but the command lacked any authority. It was a plea. "I cannot discuss client files without prior authorization." "I am the client," I stated. I walked toward her desk and reached into my tote bag. I pulled out the thick manila envelope I had taken from Kelsey's console table. I opened the flap and extracted the closing disclosure, laying it flat across her scattered paperwork. I placed my index finger on the forged signature. Then I pulled a printed spreadsheet from my bag. "This is an IP trace route," I explained, keeping my voice devoid of emotion.
It proves the digital signature on the initial loan application was executed from a residential router in Sussex County. The account belongs to my father." Miranda stared at the spreadsheet. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. I placed a second piece of paper next to the trace route. "This is a digital access log from my employer in Wilmington, Delaware. It shows I swiped my secure key card to enter a corporate server room at exactly 8:14 in the evening on that specific Friday. The timestamp matches the exact minute this deed was purportedly signed in your presence." I leaned forward, resting my palms on the edge of her desk. "It is physically impossible for me to be standing in a server room in Newcastle County while simultaneously signing a mortgage in Sussex County." Miranda pressed her back against her ergonomic chair, trying to create distance between herself and the undeniable proof. A thin sheen of sweat appeared on her forehead. I pointed to the black ink stamp on the bottom of the deed. "Gary Mitchell applied his notary seal to a forged document. You accepted that document. You cleared the title. You authorized the disbursement of $670,000 based on a fraudulent identity verification." "I did not know," she stammered, her hands trembling as she brought them up to cover her mouth. "I swear to you, I did not know it was a forgery." "You are a licensed settlement agent," I countered. "Ignorance is not a legal defense against wire fraud. The Federal Banking Commission does not accept willful blindness as an excuse. When I hand these documents over to the authorities, your state license will be revoked. You will be indicted as a co-conspirator. You are facing a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over the lower rims of her glasses. She reached up and pulled the glasses off, wiping her face with a shaking hand. "It was Dennis," she said, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Dennis Caldwell." The name registered in my memory. Dennis Caldwell was a local mortgage broker. He also happened to be the treasurer of the country club where my father played golf every Sunday. The pieces of the conspiracy clicked together, locking into a solid, unbreakable chain. "Dennis brokered the loan." Miranda continued the words, tumbling out in a desperate rush. "He is our biggest vendor. He brings this agency millions of dollars in premium volume every quarter. He called my boss the morning of the closing. He said the Ellis file needed to be expedited. He said it was a family transaction and the daughter could not make the drive down from Wilmington." "You allowed a third party to dictate compliance protocol?" I asked, noting her exact phrasing. "My boss told me to push it through," she pleaded, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Dennis brought the signed documents into the office himself. He had the notary stamp already applied. Gary Mitchell is his golfing buddy, too. They all play together. Dennis handed me a scanned copy of your driver's license." "A scanned copy?" I repeated the absurdity of the violation echoing in the small room. "You processed a 6-figure real estate transaction using a photocopy of an identification card. It was expired," she admitted, dropping her gaze to her lap. "The license expired 2 years ago. I flagged it in the system. I told my boss we could not fund the loan without a valid, unexpired ID presented in person. My boss walked into my cubicle, deleted the flag, and told me if I delayed Dennis Caldwell's closing, I would be looking for a new job by Monday. The systemic failure was total. A network of middle-aged men prioritizing their social and financial leverage over basic federal law. They had relied on the structural vulnerability of a subordinate employee to execute their crime. They assumed Miranda would prioritize her paycheck over her ethics. They were right, but they had not anticipated an auditor reviewing the ledger. "I need the internal emails," I said. "I need the digital flag you placed on the expired license and the system log showing your boss overriding the protocol." Miranda hesitated, her eyes darting toward her computer monitor. "If I give you that, my career in real estate is over. They will blacklist me." If you do not give me that, you are going to federal prison, I replied, my tone flattening into a cold, precise certainty. You have a choice, Miranda. You can be the primary target of a federal indictment, or you can be my star witness. I suggest you choose the option that keeps you out of a courtroom cell. She stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The calculation played out behind her tear-streaked eyes. The instinct for self-preservation is a powerful motivator. It overrides corporate loyalty and managerial fear every single time. She turned toward her computer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her keystrokes frantic and loud in the quiet office. She minimized her email client and opened a hidden directory on her local drive. I knew this would blow up, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the computer tower. I knew Dennis was too reckless. I made copies of everything, the emails from my boss, the scanned expired license, the original closing instructions. I kept a personal file just in case. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She inserted it into the USB port and dragged a compressed folder onto the drive. A progress bar flashed on the screen, filling with green light before disappearing. She ejected the drive and held it out to me. Her hand was still shaking. The folder is encrypted, she said. The password is my employee identification number. It is written on the back of the drive in permanent marker. I reached out and took the metal device. It felt cold against my palm. This small piece of hardware contained the precise data required to dismantle the entire conspiracy. It was the digital proof that my parents, my godfather, a mortgage broker, and a title agency manager had colluded to steal my life. You do not warn Dennis, I instructed, dropping the flash drive into my tote bag. You do not speak to your boss. You do not answer any phone calls from my father. If anyone asks you about this file, you tell them it is archived in the off-site storage facility. Do you understand the assignment? Miranda nodded rapidly, pressing her lips together in a tight, pale line. I understand. Please just keep me out of jail. I did not offer her comfort. I did not promise her safety. I turned around and opened the heavy wooden door, stepping back into the carpeted hallway. The receptionist was still typing at her desk, oblivious to the structural collapse that had just occurred 30 feet away. I walked out of the building and back into the stifling heat of the afternoon. I had the witness. I had the physical documents. I had the encrypted confessions. The ledger was fully documented, and the audit was prepared for execution. I drove the long stretch of highway back to Wilmington, operating on a cold, precise adrenaline. The sun began to set, casting long, jagged shadows across the asphalt. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, the neighborhood was bathed in the dim, artificial glow of streetlights. I walked up the concrete path to my front door. The porch light flickered, casting a yellow hue over the small brass mailbox mounted next to the frame. I unlocked the box and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Most of it was standard billing statements and grocery store circulars, but nestled in the center of the pile was a stiff white envelope bearing the distinct official seal of the Department of the Treasury. The return address read, Internal Revenue Service. Across the front in bold red lettering were the words, Certified Mail Return Receipt Requested. I stopped on the porch, the key still turning in the lock of my front door. The chill of the evening air seeped through my blazer. The state-level fraud I had just unraveled was suddenly overshadowed by a massive federal shadow. The tax implications of my stolen identity had arrived, and the financial trap was far deeper than a simple mortgage default. The stiff white envelope rested in my hand, carrying a weight that defied its physical dimensions. I stood on the concrete porch of my townhouse, staring at the bold red lettering printed across the top left corner, Department of the Treasury Internal Revenue Service, Certified Mail Return Receipt Requested. The yellow slip indicating the mail carrier had signed on my behalf
fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. The chill of the October air seeped through the fabric of my blazer, but the cold radiating through my chest had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I pushed the front door open and stepped into the dark foyer. I did not reach for the light switch. The artificial glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the blinds, casting long, thin shadows across the hardwood floor. I dropped my leather tote bag onto the console table, hearing the heavy thud of the encrypted flash drive settling against the wood. The state-level forgery I had just uncovered in Lewis felt like a minor administrative error compared to the federal shadow now looming over my living room. I walked into the kitchen and sat on one of the bar stools at the island. I turned on the small pendant light directly overhead. The beam illuminated the envelope, highlighting the official government seal. You can negotiate with a regional mortgage lender. You can threaten a complicit title agent with a state licensing board. You cannot negotiate with the federal tax apparatus. The federal machine operates without emotion, without context, and without mercy. I slid my index finger under the flap and tore the envelope open. The adhesive gave way with a sharp tearing sound. I unfolded the thick bureaucratic stationery and flattened it against the granite countertop. The document was a notice of intent to levy. I read the standardized paragraphs, my eyes scanning the dense legal terminology. The federal algorithm had flagged my social security number for severe discrepancies. Because my primary registered residence and my place of employment were located in Newcastle County, the system automatically classified the $670,000 property in Sussex County as an investment vehicle. An investment property carries distinct tax obligations. My parents had bypassed those obligations entirely. They had ignored the local property tax assessments, believing they could push the municipal bills down the road while they funded Kelsey and her custom renovations. But municipalities do not wait. Sussex County had reported the delinquency to the federal level, triggering a cascade of automated audits. The unpaid property taxes were only the first layer of the trap. I read further down the page where the true financial catastrophe was detailed in stark black ink. The agency was questioning the source of the initial down payment. A conventional loan on a luxury secondary property requires a minimum 20% capital injection. Tom and Brenda had wired over $134,000 into the escrow account to close the deal. Because the deed and the mortgage were registered in my name, the federal government viewed that inbound wire transfer as an unreported capital gift. A sudden unexplained influx of 6 figures into a personal real estate transaction triggers immediate red flags for money laundering and tax evasion. The IRS was demanding documentation proving the origin of the funds. They were demanding the gift tax forms. They were demanding their percentage. My pulse hammered against the side of my neck. I pressed my fingertips against my temples, feeling the steady rhythmic throb of my own heartbeat. My father always viewed taxation as a personal insult rather than a civic duty. Growing up, I would sit at the kitchen table doing my algebra homework while Tom sorted through receipts cursing the government for taking his hard-earned money. He spent decades finding loopholes, exploiting gray areas, and bending the rules of his corporate expense accounts. He considered himself a financial genius, outsmarting a rigged system. He believed his clever accounting made him superior to the average taxpayer. He had applied that same arrogant logic to this real estate transaction. He likely liquidated a hidden investment account or drained a retirement fund to secure the down payment for his favorite child. But instead of routing the money through his own name and absorbing the capital gains penalty, he used my pristine digital identity as a shield. He funneled the cash through my forged signature, transferring the entire federal tax liability squarely onto my shoulders. He bought Kelsey a coastal sanctuary, and he handed me a federal indictment. If I failed to respond to the notice within 30 days, the agency would initiate asset seizure protocols. They would garnish my wages. They would freeze my checking accounts. They would place a permanent lien on anything I ever tried to own. I pushed the letter away from me. The granite countertop felt cold against my forearms. I needed to see the exact flow of the money. I needed to trace the capital injection back to its source to prove I was not the originator of the funds. I slid off the bar stool and retrieved my laptop from my home office, bringing it back to the kitchen island. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the silver flash drive I had extracted from Miranda Reed. I inserted the metal device into the side port of the computer. The operating system prompted me for a password. I typed in the employee identification number Miranda had scrawled in permanent marker on the casing. The progress bar flashed and the encrypted folder unlocked, revealing dozens of internal agency documents. I bypassed the email chains between Miranda and her boss. I ignored the scanned copy of my expired driver's license. I opened the folder labeled Financial Disbursements. I scrolled through the PDF receipts until I found the incoming wire transfer record. The document detailed the exact routing numbers and the originating institution. The money had not come from a standard checking account. It had originated from a high-yield corporate holding trust. The trust was registered under a generic shell name, but the authorized signatory listed on the wire transfer form was undeniable Tom Ellis. He had authorized the transfer of his own hidden assets directly into the escrow account overseen by Dennis Caldwell, the corrupt mortgage broker. They had orchestrated a seamless, quiet injection of cash, leaving me holding the radioactive tax burden. I opened my spreadsheet, the file I had named the Rehoboth Ledger. I created a new tab at the bottom of the screen. I titled it Federal Liabilities. I typed in the exact amount of the unpaid municipal property taxes. I typed in the principal amount of the down payment. I ran a quick formula to calculate the estimated gift tax penalty, including the standard interest rates and the failure to file fees the agency tacks on to delinquent accounts. The total number in the bottom right cell was staggering. The arrears on the mortgage were $14,000, but the federal tax liability exceeded $45,000. Combined with the primary loan balance, my parents had strapped nearly $750,000 in toxic debt to my name. Every system error leaves a trace. I whispered the words to the empty kitchen, grounding myself in the philosophy that governed my profession. I was no longer just fighting to clear my credit score so I could return to my corporate desk. I was fighting to keep myself out of a federal penitentiary. I had the raw data. I had the origin points. I had the paper trail proving the collusion between my father, the broker, the notary, and the title agent. But data only matters if you have the leverage to deploy it. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop, vibrating with a harsh mechanical sound. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message. It was from Tom. The message was brief, lacking his usual manufactured warmth. "Dennis called me," he wrote. "I know you went to Lewis today. You need to stop this Harper. You have no idea what you are tearing apart. Come to the house tomorrow morning. We have to discuss your grandmother." I stared at the glowing text. The mention of Nana Betty made my chest constrict. My grandmother was currently residing in a specialized memory care facility, facing the early stages of cognitive decline. Tom held her medical power of attorney. He controlled her visitation list. He managed her care directives. He knew the legal documents in my possession could send him to prison. He knew his golf buddies were exposed. The financial theft had failed to keep me quiet, so he was pivoting to a new strategy. He was preparing to use the only person in the family I truly loved as a human shield. The audit was over. The extortion was about to begin. The morning light filtering through my bedroom blinds was a pale, anemic gray. I had not slept. The glowing screen of my laptop had served as my only illumination throughout the night, illuminating the fresh columns of the federal liability spreadsheet. By 7:00. The coffee in my mug was a bitter sludge, and my eyes burned from staring at the digitized evidence of my own ruin. I ignored the text message my father had sent the previous evening. I had no intention of driving to their house to engage in a manufactured negotiation. A negotiation implies both parties have something to lose. My parents believed they still held the high ground. I needed to seek formal legal counsel to figure out how to untangle the Internal Revenue Service lien without triggering an immediate arrest warrant for Uncle Gary. I closed the laptop and placed the encrypted flash drive into the inner zip pocket of my leather tote bag. I showered dressed in a tailored navy blazer and walked out the front door of my townhouse. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of damp autumn leaves. I locked the deadbolt and turned toward the driveway. A silver sport utility vehicle idled directly behind my 10-year-old sedan. The exhaust pipe emitted a steady plume of white vapor into the cold morning air. The vehicle was parked horizontally, blocking any chance of my car reversing into the street. The driver's side door opened. My father stepped out onto the asphalt. He wore a heavy wool sweater and slacks, projecting the image of a respectable suburban patriarch running a weekend errand. The passenger door clicked open a second later, and my mother emerged, pulling her trench coat tight against the chill. They did not look panicked. They looked resolved. I stopped at the edge of the concrete walkway. I did not retreat toward the safety of my front door. I stood my ground, holding the straps of my tote bag. "Move your vehicle," I said. "The neighborhood is quiet, and I will not hesitate to call a tow truck for obstructing a private residential driveway." Tom closed his car door. The heavy thud echoed down the empty street. He walked forward, stopping a calculated 6 feet away. He slipped his hands into his pockets, adopting a relaxed posture designed to disarm. "Dennis Caldwell called me at midnight." Tom began, skipping any pretense of a morning greeting. "He was frantic. He said you cornered his settlement agent in Lewis and terrorized her into handing over internal company files." "I did not terrorize her," I replied, keeping my voice even and flat. "I presented her with a digital trace route proving she processed a fraudulent transaction. She chose to cooperate rather than face an indictment. That flash drive is currently secured. If you are here to ask me to destroy it, you have wasted your morning." Brenda stepped up beside him. Her face was drawn, the skin tight around her mouth. "Harper, you are destroying your own family over a misunderstanding," she said, her tone dripping with rehearsed sorrow. "Your sister is choosing paint colors for the nursery she wants to have one day, and you are running around the state trying to put your own godfather in prison." "It is not a misunderstanding, Brenda," I countered, using her first name to sever the maternal illusion. "It is wire fraud, it is identity theft, and as of yesterday, it is tax evasion. The federal government intends to levy my assets because you funneled an unreported 6-figure cash gift through my forged signature." Tom shifted his weight. The relaxed posture vanished, replaced by a rigid defensive stance. "We were going to handle the property taxes," he snapped. "The municipal billing office sent the notice to the wrong address." "They sent the notice to the property address," I corrected. "The property you claim is a sanctuary for your youngest daughter. Do not blame the Postal Service for your financial crimes. Now move your vehicle. I have an appointment with a defense attorney." Tom took a step closer, crossing the invisible boundary of personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the smell of the vehicle exhaust. He looked down at me, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. "You are not going to a lawyer, Harper," he said, his voice dropping into a quiet, lethal register. "And you are not going to the police.
You are going to delete whatever files you took from that title agency, and you are going to let us manage the mortgage." I stared back at him. The sheer audacity of the command briefly short-circuited my analytical processing. Give me one logical reason why I would agree to absorb a $750,000 federal trap to protect you. "Because I am the primary medical proxy for Nana Betty," he stated. The words struck my chest like a physical weight. The air vanished from my lungs. My fingers tightened around the straps of my bag until my knuckles turned a bruised white. Nana Betty was my paternal grandmother. She was currently residing in a specialized memory care facility in northern Delaware, navigating the tragic early stages of dementia. During my childhood, while Tom and Brenda were consumed with orchestrating Kelsey and her endless pageants, Betty had been my actual parent. She was the one who taught me how to read. She was the one who sat at the kitchen table helping me balance my first checkbook. She provided the only unconditional affection I had ever known. Tom held her medical power of attorney. He controlled her finances, her care directives, and her visitation registry. "Memory care is an expensive endeavor, Harper," my father continued, his voice smooth and devoid of hesitation. "It requires a lot of capital to keep her in a premium facility. If you file a police report against me, my assets will be frozen during the investigation. If you report Gary, he loses his notary license and his business." He tilted his head, studying my reaction, watching the blood drain from my face. "If you bring this family down, I will call the nursing home administration today," he promised. "I will exercise my legal right as her medical proxy to strike your name from the approved visitor list. The security desk will turn you away at the door. You will never sit in her room again. You will never bring her those crossword puzzles she likes. When her memory finally fades, she will forget you exist. And when she passes away, I will ensure security bars you from attending the funeral." The street around us fell dead silent. The early morning birds stopped chirping. The distant hum of highway traffic faded into nothingness. This was the true extortion. The financial fraud was just the prelude. Tom knew he could not outsmart my auditing skills, and he knew he could not defeat the digital evidence. So he bypassed the ledger entirely and attacked the single emotional vulnerability I possessed. He was holding an elderly woman hostage to protect his favorite child. Brenda looked away, staring at the manicured lawn across the street. She did not intervene. She did not object to her husband weaponizing a grandmother. She stood in silent complicity, accepting the cruel tactic as a necessary measure to preserve their manufactured reality. "You would isolate your own mother." I whispered the words, scraping painfully against my throat. "You would let her die alone just to keep Kelsey in a beachfront condo." "I am protecting my family," Tom replied, his tone unwavering. "You are the one choosing to tear it apart over a simple credit score." He did not wait for my response. The threat did not require a debate. "The choice is yours, Harper. You can be right, or you can keep your grandmother. You cannot have both." He turned around and walked back to the silver sport utility vehicle. Brenda followed him. Her head bowed, the collar of her trench coat pulled up. The doors slammed shut. The engine revved and the vehicle reversed out of the driveway, tires screeching slightly as they accelerated down the suburban street. I stood on the concrete walkway. The crisp morning air felt suffocating. My analytical mind, the engine that processed data, calculated risk, and executed solutions, ground to a sudden, devastating halt. I could not balance this equation. The math was impossible. If I chose justice, I would be permanently severed from the only maternal figure who had ever loved me. If I chose my grandmother, I would lose my corporate career, my financial independence, and likely face federal charges for a tax liability I could never repay. I turned around and walked back to my front door.
My hands shook so badly I could barely guide the key into the deadbolt. I pushed the door open and stepped into the dim foyer, dropping my bag onto the floor. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, resting my elbows on my knees and pressing my face into my hands. The paralysis was total. I was trapped in a cage built from my own pristine credit and my own capacity for love. I sat there for an hour listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. The fight had been drained out of me. The ledger was closed. Tom had won. Then the silence of the house was shattered. My cell phone chimed from the depths of my tote bag. It was not the soft ping of a text message. It was the loud, sharp, dual-tone alert I had assigned to my financial monitoring application. I lifted my head. The tears that had been gathering in my eyes dried instantly. I reached into the bag and pulled out the device. The screen illuminated, displaying an urgent push notification from the credit bureau. New hard inquiry detected. I swiped the notification to open the application. A hard inquiry occurs when a consumer actively applies for a new line of credit requiring a deep pull of their financial history. I had not applied for anything. The application loaded the details of the alert. The inquiring institution was a regional bank headquartered in Sussex County, Delaware. The credit product requested was a home equity line of credit. The requested amount was $50,000. Someone was trying to leverage the false equity in the Rehoboth Beach property. The mortgage was 90 days delinquent. The property taxes were unpaid, but the coastal market had appreciated. Someone had discovered that appreciation and was currently filling out an application using my social security number to extract cash from a house I did not buy. The paralysis evaporated. The cold, heavy weight in my chest was replaced by a sharp, burning clarity. Tom had threatened to take away my grandmother if I went to the authorities. But this new inquiry was not Tom. Tom was driving back to his suburban house. Tom was focused on containing the fallout. This reckless, greedy attempt to pull $50,000 in cash from a burning building had the distinct erratic signature of someone who believed money materialized from thin air. It was Kelsey. The emotional extortion ceased to function. If I allowed my sister to execute a fraudulent equity line against a federally flagged property, I would not just lose my job. I would be indicted for bank fraud by association. The choice was no longer between my grandmother and my credit score. The choice was survival. The glowing screen of my smartphone illuminated the dim foyer of my townhouse. $50,000. The number floated in the digital alert, mocking the emotional devastation I had just endured. A home equity line of credit is a secondary financial instrument. It functions like a revolving credit card tethered to the appraised value of a physical property. If the borrower defaults, the bank seizes the house. But the property in Sussex County was already 90 days delinquent. The primary lender was preparing foreclosure proceedings. The local municipality had reported unpaid taxes. The federal government was preparing a levy. Yet someone had looked at that burning financial structure and decided the best course of action was to extract another $50,000 in liquid cash. I tapped the alert, expanding the inquiry details. The request had been submitted to a local institution named Coastal Trust Bank. The timestamp indicated the application had been initiated online less than 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago, my parents had been pulling out of my driveway. Brenda had been sitting in the passenger seat of their silver sport utility vehicle with her head bowed. I had assumed she was experiencing a fleeting moment of maternal shame regarding the blackmail Tom had just executed. I was wrong. She had not been looking down in shame. She had been looking down at her mobile device. While Tom stood on my walkway threatening to isolate my elderly grandmother, Brenda had been quietly navigating a banking portal, typing my social security number into a new loan application. They were trying to pull cash out of the false equity to cover the mountain of credit card debt Kelsey had undoubtedly accumulated purchasing imported tiles and custom furniture. The driveway ambush was not just emotional extortion, it was a calculated stalling tactic. They needed me paralyzed by grief just long enough for the secondary loan to fund. A profound, chilling stillness settled over me. The terror that had paralyzed my limbs evaporated. The grief regarding my grandmother hardened into something sharp and unyielding. If a citizen discovers a fraudulent federal loan application submitted in their name and fails to report it, they transition from a victim to a co-conspirator. If Coastal Trust Bank approved the equity line and dispersed $50,000 to an account controlled by my parents, I would be legally implicated in federal bank fraud. The Department of Justice does not care about suburban family dynamics. They care about the flow of illicit capital. Tom had wagered my freedom against my love for Nana Betty. It was a losing bet. You cannot negotiate with a parasite. You can only sever the host. I walked past the staircase and entered my home office. I sat at my desk and pulled my laptop toward me. I did not open my ledger spreadsheet. I opened a web browser and navigated to the official website for Coastal Trust Bank. I located the direct phone number for their fraud prevention department. I dialed the number and put my phone on speaker. A representative named Mark answered after 3 rings. His tone was cheerful, carrying the standard customer service cadence of a regional branch employee. "I need to halt a pending credit application immediately," I stated, skipping the pleasantries. "My name is Harper Ellis. My social security number has been compromised. An unauthorized party submitted a request for a home equity line of credit against a property in Sussex, Delaware, approximately 1 hour ago." Mark paused. The typing on his end ceased. "Can you verify your identity for me, Ms. Ellis?" he asked, his cheerful tone dropping into a cautious professional register. I provided my full legal name, my date of birth, and my social security number. Mark initiated the secondary verification protocol, generating a series of out-of-wallet security questions derived from my deep credit history. He asked for the name of the county where I lived in 2015. He asked for the make of the vehicle I financed 10 years ago. I answered every question with rapid precision. "Thank you," Mark said. "I see the pending application here. It was submitted through our digital portal. The requested draw is $50,000. The routing instructions indicate the funds should be deposited into an external checking account ending in 4291. I recognized the last 4 digits. It was the joint checking account Tom and Brenda had maintained since I was in high school. The arrogance of the theft was breathtaking. They were directing stolen equity straight into their own primary banking ledger. "Cancel the application," I instructed, my voice echoing off the walls of my office. "Flag the file as felony identity theft. I am the sole legal owner of the referenced property, and I did not authorize this inquiry. If you process that draw, your institution will be facilitating federal wire fraud." "I am placing a hard stop on the file right now," Mark assured me, the rapid clicking of his keyboard verifying his action. "The underwriting department will review the fraud alert, and the application will be formally declined. I recommend you contact the major credit bureaus immediately to restrict access to your profile." I thanked him and ended the call. The secondary loan was dead. The cash infusion my parents desperately needed to keep Kelsey afloat had been severed, but halting a single application was a temporary measure. They still possessed my personal data. They still viewed my financial identity as a resource to be harvested. I opened 3 new browser tabs, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. I logged into each portal, navigating the user interfaces with practiced efficiency. I bypassed the standard credit monitoring services and located the security settings. I selected the option for a total security freeze, A security freeze is the nuclear option of personal finance. It locks the credit file behind an encrypted personal identification number. No lender, no bank, and no credit card issuer can access the data. Without access to the data, no new accounts can be opened. The freeze would complicate my own life, requiring me to manually lift the restriction every time I needed to lease a car or rent an apartment, but it effectively turned my social security number into a useless string of digits for anyone else. I initiated the freeze across all 3 bureaus. The confirmation screens loaded one by one, displaying green check marks. The digital doors slammed shut, locking my parents out of my financial existence forever. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the 3 green check marks. The emotional ties that had tethered me to my family for 34 years dissolved. The label of the cold daughter they had assigned to me was no longer an insult. It was my armor. Tom had threatened to banish me from my grandmother's memory care facility. He intended to erase me from her final years. The thought still carried a sharp, agonizing pain, but I recognized it as a necessary casualty of war. I could not save Nana Betty by allowing my parents to drag me into a federal prison cell. She was the woman who had taught me how to balance a checkbook. She had taught me the value of integrity. She would never want me to sacrifice my freedom to fund an oceanfront renovation. I closed the browser tabs. The defensive measures were complete. The identity theft had been halted. The credit profile was secured. But defense does not resolve a fraudulent $670,000 mortgage. Defense does not satisfy an Internal Revenue Service tax lien. I needed to transition to an offensive strategy. I needed to execute a penalty so severe it would permanently close the ledger. But an ambush requires the target to feel secure. If Tom and Brenda knew I had frozen my credit and reported the equity line as fraud, they would panic. They would hire a defense attorney. They would attempt to sell the property or shift the assets to hide their tracks. I needed to lull them into a false sense of security. I needed them to believe their driveway extortion had worked. I picked up my phone and opened my text messaging application. I created a new group thread adding my father, my mother, and Kelsey. I stared at the blank text field, considering the psychology of my targets. They expected me to cave under the pressure. They expected the responsible daughter to absorb the damage and draft a compromise. I typed the message, keeping the syntax submissive and defeated. I have thought about what you said this morning. I do not want to lose Nana Betty. We need to fix this before the bank forecloses. Come to my townhouse on Sunday at 5 o'clock in the evening. We can sit down, have dinner, and figure out a payment plan. I read the text twice. It was the perfect bait. It offered them exactly what they wanted. It promised a resolution that protected their favorite child and kept their own bank accounts intact. I pressed send. The message delivered. I placed the phone face down on the desk. The trap was set. They would arrive at my home expecting a surrender. They had no idea they were walking into a financial execution. The response to my text message arrived 3 minutes later. A simple thumbs-up emoji from Tom appeared on my screen. He believed the war was over. He believed I had folded under the weight of his extortion, choosing to absorb a devastating financial blow to preserve my relationship with my grandmother. I placed the phone on my nightstand and turned off the lamp, allowing the dark to claim the room. I finally slept. I woke up with the sunrise on Friday morning. My mind was a pristine grid. The emotional noise, the grief of betrayal, and the panic of the federal notice had been filtered out, leaving only raw, actionable data. The first variable to isolate and secure was my grandmother. I dressed in a tailored suit and drove to a family law practice in downtown Wilmington. The attorney was a sharp, pragmatic woman named Sarah who specialized in elder care and proxy litigation. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk and outlined the threat Tom had delivered. I explained his medical power of attorney and his intent to weaponize the facility visitor registry to isolate Nana Betty. Sarah listened, taking precise notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set her pen down and delivered the legal reality. A medical proxy is not a prison sentence, she explained, her voice steady and professional. It grants your father the authority to make healthcare decisions if Betty is incapacitated. It does not grant him the right to act as a warden. Sarah detailed the loophole. Because Betty was in the early stages of cognitive decline, she still possessed periods of legal lucidity. During those periods, she retained her civil rights, including the right to consent to visitors. Furthermore, Delaware law strictly protects familial association for elderly residents in care facilities, prohibiting proxies from using isolation as a tool for emotional abuse. Sarah drafted an emergency visitation mandate to be filed with the state elder advocate and served directly to the facility administration. It bypassed Tom entirely. He would receive a formal notice from a state agency warning him that any attempt to restrict my access would trigger an immediate state investigation into elder isolation. His power over her was an illusion shattered by basic legal procedure. The hostage was secured. I paid Sarah her retainer fee and walked out of the office. The cold autumn air felt lighter. The tight band of anxiety constricting my chest snapped. Now I needed to dismantle the financial trap. I drove back to my townhouse and opened the digital folder containing the Sussex County documents. I stared at the forged deed on my monitor. My parents had executed a brilliant theft, but their arrogance had blinded them to a fundamental mechanism of property law. By forging the documents in my name alone to hide their involvement, they had granted me unilateral authority over the asset. I was the sole legal owner of record. Tom had no legal claim to the imported marble. Kelsey had no legal right to the oceanfront views. It was my house, and a sole owner possesses the unilateral right of alienation. I had the power to sell it. I did not have time to list the property through a traditional real estate brokerage. A conventional sale requires staging open houses and a drawn-out escrow period lasting 30 to 60 days. I had less than a week before the federal levy activated and the local bank initiated formal foreclosure. I needed a liquidator. I opened my search engine and queried corporate property acquisition firms operating in the coastal region. These are the ruthless holding companies that advertise fast cash for distressed properties. They prey on desperate homeowners, offering pennies on the dollar to secure assets they can flip for a high margin. I was not a desperate homeowner. I was an auditor balancing a ledger. I found Vanguard Holding Group. I called their acquisitions hotline and asked to speak with a regional director. A man named Marcus took the call. His voice carried the brisk, impatient tone of a man who evaluated human tragedy in terms of profit margins. I did not offer him a story. I offered him arithmetic. I have a pristine luxury condominium in Rehoboth Beach, I told him. The property features newly installed custom upgrades and sits 3 blocks from the ocean. The current market appraisal is $900,000. I am offering it to Vanguard for a cash purchase price of $730,000. Marcus laughed a dry, cynical sound. If a property is worth $9,000, he said, why are you offering it to me for $7,000? What is the structural defect? There is no structural defect, I replied, maintaining a flat, clinical tone. The defect is the timeline. I require a 72-hour cash closing. The purchase price must cover the primary mortgage payoff, the current arrears, and an outstanding federal tax lien. You wire the funds directly to the creditors to clear the title, and you keep the residual equity. I walk away with nothing but a zero balance. The line went silent. In the cutthroat world of corporate real estate, a guaranteed margin of nearly $200,000 for a turnkey property is an anomaly. It is the kind of deal acquisition agents build their quarterly bonuses around.
"Send me the address and the title details,"
Marcus said, his skepticism replaced by sharp predatory interest.
"If the title is clear and the numbers match your pitch, I will be at your house by 3 o'clock with a purchase agreement."
I sent him the encrypted file minus the evidence of the forgery. As far as the public record was concerned, the deed was authentic. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a black sedan parked in my driveway. Marcus walked up to my door carrying a thick leather folio. He wore a severe charcoal suit and possessed the cold, detached demeanor of a corporate liquidator. We sat at my kitchen island. He slid the purchase agreement across the granite.
"The title search came back clean," he confirmed. "Vanguard is prepared to assume the property. We have authorized the rapid wire transfers to satisfy the national lender and the Department of the Treasury. The funds will clear escrow by Saturday morning."
I picked up a blue ballpoint pen. I looked at the signature line. The ink I was about to press into the paper would undo the sloppy forgery my father had orchestrated. It would vaporize the sanctuary my sister believed she owned. It would redirect the federal wrath away from my Social Security number. I signed my name. The strokes were fluid, practiced, and authentic. The loops were tight. The sharp angle on the letter H was distinct. I pushed the document back across the island. Marcus reviewed the signature, placed the paper back into his leather folio, and stood up.
"Vanguard Holding Group now owns the property," he stated. "We will handle the physical asset recovery."
I escorted him out and locked the door. I walked back to my home office and woke up my computer. I opened the Rehoboth ledger. I highlighted the cell containing the $14,000 arrears. I deleted the value. I highlighted the cell containing the $660,000 principal. I deleted it. I moved to the Federal Liabilities tab. I erased the property taxes and the gift tax penalty. The spreadsheet columns were blank. The total balance at the bottom of the screen read 0. I saved the file and closed the application. The quiet of the townhouse wrapped around me, but it was no longer the silence of isolation. It was the silence of a closed account. The preparation was complete. The leverage my parents thought they held had been legally evaporated. I picked up my phone to check my messages. An automated alert from a social media platform flashed across the screen. It was a notification from my sister's public profile. Kelsey had just posted a digital invitation for a massive housewarming party scheduled for Saturday night. She was inviting all of her friends to celebrate her success and admire her new marble countertops. A cold, satisfying realization settled over me. The Sunday dinner I had scheduled with my parents was no longer necessary. I did not need to confront them in the privacy of my own home. I was going to deliver the final audit in front of an audience. The notification glowed against the dark background of my phone screen. Kelsey had titled her digital event Coastal New Beginnings. The invitation featured a carefully curated photograph of my sister holding a crystal champagne flute, leaning against the imported Calicotta marble island. The text beneath the image boasted about the rewards of manifestation and the joy of creating a personal sanctuary. She listed a start time of 8 o'clock on Saturday evening. The dress code was designated as beach formal. The sheer disconnect between her curated reality and the financial crater she currently occupied was staggering. She was inviting 30 people to drink expensive wine inside a federal crime scene. A second notification pinged moments later. It was a direct message from Tom, followed in rapid succession by one from Brenda. My father wrote, "Glad you decided to be reasonable, Harper. We can review the numbers Sunday and get this past us." Brenda sent a follow-up text requesting I bring a specific spinach dip from a boutique deli near my townhouse. The banality of their requests was mesmerizing. They had compartmentalized their extortion so thoroughly they were now crowdsourcing appetizers for a fake negotiation. They genuinely believed the threat against my grandmother had broken my spine. They assumed my compliance was guaranteed because I had always been the compliant daughter. I did not reply to either message. Silence is the most effective confirmation for a narcissist. It allows them to project whatever submission they expect to see onto a blank canvas. Saturday morning dawned clear and unseasonably cold. I spent the early hours in my home office preparing the physical artifacts of the audit. Digital evidence is easily dismissed by people who refuse to understand the mechanics of data. Tangible paper carries a different gravity. I turned on my high-capacity laser printer. The machine whirred to life, the internal rollers warming the toner. I opened a fresh box of heavy stock paper. I needed the documents to feel substantial in their hands. I printed the encrypted file Miranda Reed had provided. The pages detailed the coerced closing and the bypassed identification protocols, proving the title agency knew the transaction was defective. I printed the Internal Revenue Service notice of intent to levy. I used a yellow highlighter to isolate the six-figure gift tax penalty, drawing a bright, inescapable line across their hidden capital transfer. Next came the Coastal Trust Bank fraud alert. The printout detailed the $50,000 home equity line of credit initiated from their suburban Internet Protocol address. It highlighted the routing instructions directing the funds into their joint checking account. Finally, I printed the recorded deed. I focused on the final signature page bearing the clumsy forgery of my name resting just inches above Uncle Gary and his official state-commissioned notary seal. I arranged the pages into 4 distinct stacks on my desk. I retrieved 4 unmarked manila folders from my supply drawer. I slipped a complete set of documents into each folder, sealing the brass clasps. They looked identical to the standard files I carried into corporate boardrooms every week. They held the same clinical authority. I stacked them neatly inside my leather tote bag. The weight of the paper felt grounding. At 4 p.m, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed the Vanguard Holding Group main office number. Marcus was on the line. "The funds cleared escrow an hour ago," he stated, his tone crisp and transactional. "The mortgage arrears are satisfied. The municipal tax office confirmed receipt of the back payments. The federal tax lien has been neutralized by the payoff structure. The property is officially ours. We have a crew scheduled to change the locks and secure the premises on Tuesday morning." I needed to accelerate his timeline. I instructed him to meet me in Wilmington and ride down to Sussex County with me tonight. I explained the current occupant was hosting a large gathering. I outlined the risk of property damage, emphasizing that an immediate physical assertion of ownership would mitigate Vanguard's liability during the eviction window. Corporate liquidators hate uncontrolled liability. Marcus evaluated the logic and agreed to the detour. He arrived at my townhouse just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. He wore a severe charcoal suit and carried his thick leather folio. He transferred the folio to the passenger seat of my sedan and buckled his seatbelt without a word of greeting. We drove south on Route 1. The silence inside the cabin was heavy but highly functional. Marcus did not ask probing questions about my family dynamics. He evaluated the situation purely through the lens of asset retrieval. I appreciated his cold detachment because it mirrored my own. The sky bruised into shades of deep purple and indigo as we crossed the county line. The coastal highway grew congested with weekend traffic. The tourists were returning to the beach towns, seeking a brief escape from their routines. I navigated the familiar turns leading to the luxury development, keeping my speed consistent. The air conditioning hummed, blending with the rhythmic thud of the tires against the pavement. My pulse remained steady. I did not feel the familiar knot of anxiety that usually accompanied family gatherings. I did not feel the pressure to perform the role of the quiet, accommodating sibling. The woman who had allowed her parents to siphon her resources was gone. She had been erased by a forged signature and a threat against a vulnerable elderly woman. I pulled onto the cobblestone street of the condominium complex. The modern building loomed ahead, its expansive floor-to-ceiling windows blazing with warm amber light. Dozens of expensive vehicles lined the curb, spilling over into the guest parking areas. As I shifted the transmission into park, I could hear the faint rhythmic pulse of electronic music drifting through the salty ocean breeze. Shadows of guests moved past the glass holding drinks and laughing. I turned off the engine. The dashboard lights faded to black. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my tote bag, feeling the solid weight of the 4 manila folders shifting inside. I looked at Marcus. He nodded once, retrieving his leather folio from the passenger footwell. The setup was over. We opened our doors and stepped out into the coastal night, walking toward the glowing windows of an illusion that was about to be shattered. The ocean breeze whipped against my tailored blazer as Marcus and I crossed the cobblestone driveway. The thumping bass vibrating through the heavy mahogany door served as a pulse for the crime occurring inside. I bypassed the decorative doorbell, grasping the brushed steel handle and pushing the door open with a firm thrust. The humid air of the party washed over us, carrying the scent of expensive catering and spilled alcohol. I stepped onto the engineered hardwood. We are now caught up to the exact moment I described earlier. The music died. The room held its breath. Kelsey stood by the imported stone island, her silver dress shimmering under the recessed lighting. My father gripped his highball glass, his knuckles white, his face flushed with indignation. I did not flinch under the collective stare of 30 strangers. I reached into my leather tote bag. The smooth surface of the 4 manila folders met my fingertips. I withdrew them, resting the stack against my hip. I walked forward, navigating the awkward silence. The guests parted like water, creating a clear path to the kitchen. I stopped across from my sister. I placed the first folder onto the pristine surface, pushing it toward her. I set the second folder in front of my father. I handed the third to my mother, who had materialized from the hallway, her face a mask of sudden terror. I kept the fourth folder tucked under my arm. "Open them," I instructed. My voice carried the flat, unyielding cadence of an executive delivering a termination notice. Kelsey stared at the unmarked paper. "What is this, Harper?" she asked, her tone defensive but trembling. "Are you trying to ruin my night?" "Your night was ruined 3 weeks ago," I replied. "You just lack the data to realize it. Open the file." Tom slammed his glass onto the counter. The ice clattered against the rim. "You have crossed a line, Harper," he snapped. "Get out of this house before I call local law enforcement." I turned my head to face him. "Call them," I suggested, keeping my posture perfectly still. "Dial the authorities right now, Tom. Tell them there is a trespasser inside your property. But before the dispatcher answers, you might want to review the first page of that packet." Brenda reached out with shaking fingers. She flipped open the cover. The bright yellow highlighter I had used on the Internal Revenue Service notice glowed under the pendant lights. She read the bold red text. A soft gasp escaped her lips. She dropped the packet onto the counter, backing away as if the paper itself were radioactive. "What is an intent to levy?" Kelsey asked, peering over her mother's shoulder. Her brow furrowed, struggling to comprehend the dense bureaucratic terminology. "Why does it say you owe $45,000? I shifted my gaze back to my sister. "That is a federal tax penalty," I explained. projecting my voice so every guest in the room could hear the arithmetic.
Our parents executed a wire transfer of $134,000 to secure the down payment for this unit. Because they orchestrated the transaction using my forged signature, the Department of the Treasury classified their illicit capital injection as an unreported gift. The government intends to seize my assets to satisfy the debt they created.
Kelsey recoiled.
Forged signature,
she echoed, looking at Tom.
Dad, what is she talking about?
Tom ignored her. He stared at the documents inside his folder. He saw the encrypted emails from Coastal Title. He saw the digital trace route proving his internet router originated the fraud. The flush faded from his cheeks, replaced by a sickly pale hue.
You sit in a boardroom calculating risk.
I continued, addressing my father directly.
You assumed I was a low-risk target. You believed the emotional leverage involving Nana Betty would force me to absorb your crimes. You forgot that an auditor always follows the money.
I gestured toward Marcus, who remained silent near the entryway, his leather folio tucked under his arm.
When you forge a deed solely in someone else's name to hide your own involvement, you grant that person unilateral legal authority over the asset, I stated. This property belonged to me. The debt belonged to me. Therefore, I exercised my right of alienation. I sold the unit to Vanguard Holding Group. The sale cleared escrow this afternoon.
The silence in the room deepened, transforming into a suffocating vacuum. Kelsey looked around at her friends, her curated reality fracturing into sharp, unrecoverable pieces. A few guests near the door began setting their drinks down quietly, stepping toward the exit to distance themselves from the unfolding legal disaster. Brenda placed a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. She looked at the marble countertops she had helped select, running her fingers along the smooth stone edge, as if trying to anchor herself to a fantasy that was rapidly dissolving. She knew the consequences of a federal audit. She knew Tom could not charm his way out of an Internal Revenue Service investigation.
You sold my house.
Kelsey whispered, tears welling in her eyes, blurring her carefully applied makeup.
You sold my home. How could you do this to your own sister? I sold my house, Kelsey.
I corrected her, maintaining a steady, measured volume.
You never owned it. You were merely trespassing in a structure financed by my stolen identity. You were decorating a crime scene. Marcus is here representing the new corporate owners. The proceeds from the short cash sale satisfied the primary mortgage arrears and neutralized the federal tax lien. Vanguard Holding Group now holds the title. The ledger is zeroed out. Your custom brass hardware belongs to a Delaware corporation.
Tom crumpled the edge of the manila folder. His breathing grew shallow, his chest heaving under his wool sweater.
You vindictive little witch!
He hissed, the facade of the respectable patriarch dissolving entirely.
We built this family. We gave you everything. You owe us respect. I will drag you through civil court. I will sue you for the down payment. I will claim elder financial abuse. I will hire a team of corporate litigators to tie you up in endless injunctions for the next 10 years. You will spend every dime you earn defending yourself against me.
He stepped forward, attempting to use his physical presence to intimidate me. He loomed over the kitchen island, his shadow falling across the scattered documents. The remaining guests shrank back, witnessing the raw collapse of a suburban dynasty. The illusion of their perfect family was bleeding out onto the imported flooring. I did not step back. I held my ground, meeting his gaze with cold, analytical precision. Panic is a useless metric. I operated on data, and the data was entirely on my side.
You are welcome to file a civil claim,
I replied, my voice echoing in the tense air.
Litigation requires the process of formal legal discovery. Discovery means sworn depositions under penalty of perjury and subpoenaed financial records.
If you initiate a lawsuit, every single document inside that folder becomes a matter of public record. The fraud division will dissect your life." I opened the fourth folder I'd kept tucked under my arm. I extracted a single sheet of paper, holding it up for him to see. It was the Coastal Trust Bank fraud alert establishing the true depth of his desperation. The climax of his financial scheme was resting in the palm of my hand. "This is a fraud alert from Coastal Trust Bank," I said, holding the single sheet of paper so the recessed overhead lights illuminated the corporate logo. "It details an online application submitted yesterday morning. The applicant requested a $50,000 home equity line of credit against this exact property. The digital signature was typed using my legal name and my social security number. But the routing instructions for the cash disbursement pointed directly to an external checking account ending in 4291. I paused, letting the numbers hang in the humid air of the party. "That is your primary joint checking account, Tom," I stated. The remaining color drained from my father's face, leaving him with a sickly gray pallor. His jaw worked silently, unable to formulate a response. I turned my gaze to Brenda. She had retreated until her back pressed flat against the stainless steel refrigerator, her hands gripping the edges of her expensive trench coat. "While your husband stood in my driveway yesterday threatening to banish me from my grandmother's nursing home, you were sitting in the passenger seat of your vehicle," I said, addressing my mother. "I thought you were looking down out of shame. I was mistaken. You were looking down at your smartphone. You were navigating a banking portal trying to extract $50,000 in cash out of a sinking ship just to pay off Kelsey's mounting credit card debt." The guests who had lingered near the kitchen island shifted uncomfortably. The social dynamic had mutated from a wealthy family dispute into the live exposure of a federal crime syndicate. Tom snatched the fraud alert from my hand. His eyes darted across the printed lines, reading the timestamp and the flagged Internet Protocol address. In the American legal system, civil litigation is a slow, expensive game of attrition. A wealthy man can hire defense attorneys to bury a plaintiff in endless paperwork, but bank fraud operates under different rules. The federal government uses rigid, unyielding algorithms to track digital theft. You cannot charm a banking algorithm. You cannot gaslight an internet service provider. "Sue me, Tom," I challenged him, my voice dropping to a calm, quiet register. "Go home tonight and draft the civil complaint. Hire the most expensive corporate litigators in Delaware, but understand the mechanics of the trap you are stepping into. The moment you file those papers, the legal discovery phase initiates." I stepped closer to him, closing the physical distance. He did not step forward to meet me. He remained frozen, rooted to the expensive hardwood flooring he no longer owned. "During discovery, my attorney will submit this rejected loan application to the federal prosecutor," I explained. "We will hand over the forged deed. We will submit the encrypted emails from Coastal Title proving you coerced a settlement agent, and we will subpoena Gary Mitchell." The mention of his best friend caused a visible tremor in Tom's shoulders. "Your best man pressed his state-commissioned notary seal onto a document he knew was fake." I continued detailing the exact architecture of his downfall. "He verified a forged signature to help you secure a six-figure asset. The federal penalty for coordinated notary fraud, resulting in major financial theft, includes a mandatory prison sentence. If you attempt to sue me, you will not just lose your reputation. You will send your oldest friend to a federal penitentiary. Dennis Caldwell will lose his broker license and face his own indictment. You will pull your entire social circle into a federal investigation." Tom stared at the piece of paper in his hands. The arrogant patriarch who had tried to intimidate me with threats of endless litigation was gone. He was replaced by a terrified aging man calculating the cost of his own survival. He read the documents, and the final pieces of the audit clicked into place. The ledger was closed. He had no leverage. He had no hidden assets. He had no hostages left to exploit. He dropped the paper onto the marble counter. It landed next to the brass keys I had surrendered earlier. Kelsey let out a sharp, ragged breath. She looked from the keys to our father, her pristine illusion shattering into jagged, irreparable pieces. She finally understood the dark, mechanical engine powering her curated lifestyle. "You stole her identity," Kelsey whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the realization. She did not sound like a confident coastal homeowner. She sounded like a frightened child. "You told me the trust paid for this. You told me it was a safe investment. You used her name." Tom could not look at his favorite daughter. He turned his head away, staring blindly at the expensive custom cabinetry. Brenda covered her face with her hands, letting out a quiet, muffled sob. The toxicity of their dynamic turned inward, beginning to consume itself. My parents had sacrificed my future to shield Kelsey from reality, but their failure had just exposed her to a trauma far worse than a missed credit card payment. They had made her an unwitting accomplice to the theft of her own sister. The guests who had been standing frozen near the perimeter of the room began a rapid, silent exodus. Social preservation is a powerful instinct. The curated aesthetics of the housewarming party meant nothing when weighed against the proximity to a federal fraud investigation. Nobody wanted their name recorded on a police report. Nobody wanted to be interviewed by a detective regarding the events of this evening. Women in silk dresses and men in linen shirts set their half-empty champagne flutes onto whatever flat surface was closest. They murmured awkward apologies, retrieving their coats from the front closet. The heavy mahogany door clicked open and shut repeatedly as the crowd filtered out into the cold October night. Within 3 minutes, the 30-person gathering was reduced to a hollow, echoing shell. I looked at my sister one last time. She was gripping the edge of the kitchen island, her knuckles white, her tears falling freely onto the imported stone. I did not feel the urge to comfort her. I did not feel pity. I felt the profound, clean relief of an amputation. The gangrenous limb threatening to poison my entire existence had been successfully removed. I turned toward the entryway. Marcus stood near the door, his leather folio tucked securely under his arm. He had watched the entire execution without changing his expression. Corporate liquidators appreciate efficiency, and the eviction was now an established reality. "You have 72 hours, I said, directing my final words to the room at large. "Do not attempt to strip the fixtures. Do not try to remove the appliances or the custom hardware. Vanguard Holding Group possesses a detailed photographic inventory of this unit. If a single piece of staging is missing on Tuesday morning, Marcus will file a police report for corporate theft." Tom did not respond. Brenda continued to weep quietly into her hands. Kelsey stared at the floor, her curated world reduced to ashes. I walked across the hardwood, my sensible flats making no sound. I reached the door and stepped out into the crisp coastal air. Marcus followed me, pulling the heavy mahogany door shut behind us. The latch engaged with a solid, definitive click, sealing my family inside the ruins of their own scam. We walked down the cobblestone driveway toward my 10-year-old sedan. The ocean breeze whipped through my hair, feeling colder and cleaner than it had in months. I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat. The leather felt familiar and secure. I started the engine, the hum of the 4 cylinders sounding like a victory march. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not check my rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me worth looking at anymore. The fluorescent lights in the Wilmington corporate office hummed with a familiar sterile rhythm. I swiped my proximity badge against the electronic reader mounted beside the heavy glass doors of the server sector. The scanner emitted a sharp single beep, and the internal locking mechanism clicked open. I stepped onto the raised anti-static flooring, the cool, conditioned air washing over my face. 6 months had passed since the autumn night I left my family standing inside the imported kitchen of a stolen coastal property. My corporate security clearance was fully reinstated. Human Resources had reviewed the notarized Vanguard Holding Group settlement and the encrypted title agency files. They recognized the digital identity theft, recognizing I was a victim who had successfully audited her own ruin. I was no longer an institutional risk. I was back at my desk analyzing data, running compliance protocols, and enforcing corporate reality. During my lunch hour, I sat in my ergonomic chair and opened my personal financial monitoring application. The interface loaded, displaying my current metrics. The staggering 6-figure deficit was gone, erased by the rapid corporate liquidation. The crippling delinquency markers had been disputed and purged from my profile. My credit score hovered at 710. It was not the pristine 810 I possessed before my parents harvested my identity, but it was climbing steadily. Every point regained was a testament to my own rigorous accounting. The numbers belonged to me alone. The transition back to stability was quiet, but the severance had been loud. My mind drifted back to the Tuesday morning following the housewarming party. I had taken a final personal day from work, driving down to Sussex County to witness the physical execution of the audit. I parked my 10-year-old sedan across the street from the condominium complex, rolling my windows down to let the crisp salt air filter through the cabin. Vanguard Holding Group did not offer grace periods. At exactly 9 a.m, Marcus arrived with a commercial locksmith and a private security contractor. I watched from the safety of my vehicle as the locksmith drilled out the custom brass hardware on the mahogany front door. The metallic screech echoed down the cobblestone driveway, serving as the final punctuation mark on my sister's manufactured sanctuary. Kelsey stood on the manicured front lawn wearing a designer tracksuit, shivering in the morning coastal chill. She was screaming at a crew of local movers she had frantically hired at dawn. The men were hauling her boutique clothing, her expensive furniture, and her velvet accent chairs out of the unit, shoving them haphazardly into the back of a rented box truck. Her curated aesthetic was reduced to a chaotic pile of cardboard boxes and loose hangers. Tom and Brenda stood near the curb, their silver sport utility vehicle idling in the street. They did not attempt to intervene. They looked aged, their posture sagging under the sudden gravitational pull of consequence. Tom watched the corporate holding representatives photograph the interior of the unit, knowing his hidden capital injection was gone forever, swallowed by the short sale. He had gambled his retirement to buy his favorite child a fantasy, and the house always wins. I sat in my car observing the scene until the new commercial locks were installed and the Vanguard team formally secured the perimeter. I did not roll down my window to gloat. I did not step out to offer a final parting remark. I simply shifted my car into drive and merged onto the coastal highway, leaving them to navigate the wreckage of their own entitlement. The legal fallout radiated through their social circle. Exactly as I had predicted, Uncle Gary, terrified by the threat of a federal investigation, quietly surrendered his state notary commission. He closed his small business, avoiding prison by sacrificing his livelihood. Dennis Caldwell faced a silent internal audit at his mortgage brokerage, resulting in an abrupt early retirement. The network of middle-aged men who had prioritized their golf club loyalties over federal law crumbled under the weight of exposure. I never received a civil lawsuit from my father. He lacked the funds to hire a corporate litigator, and he lacked the courage to trigger the legal discovery phase. I pulled my thoughts back to the present, closing the financial application on my monitor. The workday ended, and I drove north toward the specialized memory care facility where Nana Betty resided. The lobby of the care center smelled of antiseptic cleaners and artificial lavender. I walked to the reception desk and handed my identification to the attending nurse. The nurse typed my name into the registry. There were no flashing red alerts. There were no access restrictions. When Tom had attempted to contact the facility administrators to bar my entry the week after the eviction, he was met with a swift legal wall. The emergency visitation mandate drafted by my elder care attorney had been filed and executed. The state advocate informed my father that any further attempts to isolate his mother would trigger an immediate investigation into elder psychological abuse. His power of attorney was stripped of its weaponized potential. He could manage her medical prescriptions, but he could not manage her heart. I walked down the quiet hallway and entered her room. Nana Betty sat in a floral armchair near the window, a book of crossword puzzles resting on her lap. She looked up when I entered, her eyes brightening with immediate recognition. I sat beside her, opening a small tin of butter cookies I had purchased from a local bakery. We spent 2 hours filling in the blank squares of the puzzle. She could not remember what she ate for breakfast, but she remembered the capital of Peru, and she remembered how to spell my name. The peace in that small room was profound. It was the only familial connection I had preserved, and it was the only one worth saving. I drove home to my townhouse as the sun set over the Delaware suburbs. The living room was neat-structured and entirely under my control. I poured a glass of cheap red wine and sat at the kitchen island listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The silence of my home was no longer a symptom of isolation. It was the architecture of freedom. I used to think being the responsible one meant I had to carry everyone else's debt. I believed the role assigned to me by my parents was a permanent condition. I thought unconditional love required serving as a human shock absorber for the reckless decisions of the people sharing my bloodline. I know now that true responsibility means knowing exactly what you owe and to whom. It means recognizing that a ledger must balance. You cannot fund the delusions of a parasite without bankrupting your own soul. The day I stopped paying their emotional and financial taxes was the day I finally purchased my own life. If this story resonated with you tonight, drop a comment below. I want to know if you have ever had to legally zero out a toxic family member. Tell me what boundary you had to enforce to protect your own future. Thank you for listening to the Sophia Vengeance channel. I will be back next week with another audit.